morning, good morning. So I do thank Jon with an H, pastor here. I'm the H-less Jon, Jon. But I thank him for the opportunity and entrusting with him not here to be able to share God's word, something of more of who he is and his journey in my life. We appreciate this church. In the short time we've been here, we moved down in the end of July, and we weren't sure where we would go. And it was interesting. We just woke up one morning and we did a little Google search, and this was the church that kind of God highlighted to us. And so this is the only church that we have come to since coming to Georgia. And so it's been great. Even during the first service, while Jon was preaching, I leaned over halfway through and I said, "What? Has he been reading my notes?" And as him and I have met in several times now, it's just been so neat, just the kinship and the vision and purpose and his great depth in the Word. It's just been wonderful, and worship, of course, and the others that we were getting to meet. And of course, the kids really enjoy the church as well. So thank you, and thank you for helping us to feel at home here as we've moved down to Georgia. So as he mentioned, I'm from New York. The proper way to say it, you can continue. It would be Long Island, New York. Next, So you can continue now to where you see these handsome three boys. There we go. So what I'm talking about today is, I figured it in the first time sharing here at Covenant Life, is the miraculous journey of God in my life, from hopelessness to hopefulness to helpfulness. And I never would have dreamed ever that God could have pulled somebody like me out of the pit. And I always consider it an honor and a privilege to speak anywhere to anyone, wherever that may be, and just astonished. And this vision that God had birthed in me when I was actually living in Madagascar for some months was this concept of value and restoring value to life. You'll see that in a moment. But the idea that unless we understand value, transformation will wait on a long queue, and how people's time is valuable, your life is valuable, and I came to, of course, recognize that my life had value. But here are, if you go back there, these were the three amigos. I have five siblings. These are two. The two on the left are twins, and then myself, the hairy one on the right. My gym teacher used to call us ladies and germs and hairy. And so that was me. Now, when I was growing up, I was with long hair, and of course, also the way I looked, I would go to, say, like the carnival, and I'd be standing online, and then there would be the person that called me up and say, "Okay, ma'am, you can go next." And I'm like, "I'm not a man or a girl." And I would run away. And so you can tell I had some really, strong identity issues as I was growing up. But then on top of that, I was born with a cleft lip and palate. I've had 9 operations, bite plates, bone grafts, you name it. Had braces for 7 years. So if you only had them for a couple, you can certainly be encouraged there. But the extraordinary thing that I'll come to when you see it in a little while is how God redeemed that all, and how the incredible blessing that something like that has been really across the nations. And so I have experienced a lot of rejection from not only inside my family, but also outside the family. And so for many years, I used to be like this. It was very difficult to understand me. And I had bone graft in my mouth, and that failed. And you imagine, like, you're trying to talk to people, and they're like, piece of bone coming out, and you start tearing up because it hurts. And they're like, "Excuse me," and you try and, break out a chunk of bone. And so then when God had called me later on and saved me and called me, then I was like, well, Lord, I'm now a public speaker. It'd be kind of great if people can kind of understand me more. I mean, especially internationally where I'd be translating. And especially, like, for example, one time in Togo, West Africa, here I am. Now I have English, then there's French, and then there's a tribal language, and then another tribal language. And then you got to try and keep your thought, too. But sometimes they would say, what'd you say? What'd you say? I'm like, oh, well, after 3 translations, I can't quite remember what I just said, but because they had a more challenging time understanding me at times. And so when I grew up with these, sometimes you can say they're blessings or something else, siblings, in my house, there were certainly challenges. My parents were divorced when I was 4, and then when I was 5 was when the more abuse kind of began to ramp up, and where I remember my 2 brothers' hands were burned on the stove, and I was locked in the basement for 3 weeks, and they would open the door, put the food there, and then close the door, and I'd been kicked so hard I couldn't breathe, and then my mom would just laugh or think I was exaggerating. My brothers were kicked out permanently. I one in the middle there, him and I were the closest, but inside the house he beat me, but outside of the house he protected me. So I don't know. But so him and I were a bit closer, and the only ones that got to know my dad, I only saw him once a week for a few years, and then in 1978 he moved down to Florida, so I saw him only once a year. And so anyway, he was the one that I ran away the first time when I was 7, and then by the time I was in 9th grade, him and I ran away to Florida, where my dad was living. We ran away somewhere, and then he drove up to New York and picked us up, and then I lived there for a year, and then I begged my mom after a year. I'd been real lonely and kind of more dysfunctional down there, and then there was a lot of racial tensions, and I was beaten up a lot. I had a group of 15 guys, and the biggest one there would just start pounding on me, and so then I pleaded with her to come home, and she finally consented, and then I had to sit there and write a 3-page contract of what I will do, what I won't do, etc. I won't tell anybody what's happening in this house. I will not allow my brothers. They were now permanently kicked out. So in our house, when we were growing up, believe it or not, in New York, we used to never lock the doors. And the only time my mom started locking the doors when the middle one there was kicked out. But so in my family, there were a lot of things that had happened. We started drinking when we were 12. My one brother started sneaking in the bars when he was 16, and getting addicted to other things. And so I was a real emotional mess, a mental mess. I had no self-esteem. I mean, to ever think that I would be walking like this and talking in front of people, I could never imagine. I mean, people who knew me then can't believe the way I am now, and people who know me now can't believe the way I was then. That's how much God's transformative power, and can only give all the glory to Him. And of course, if I move along, and I'm remiss to say that has to be up front and center in just all the miracles He's done and what He saved me from, and saving me from myself. And then you get to the point. Okay, you can move on. And so now, getting to the point where, like here, what good can ever come out of Nazareth? You remember that conversation with Jesus and Philip and Nathaniel when He was calling them out? And here it is, He's calling them, and just like me, you can apply it to yourself. I mean, what good could ever come out of Jon Syrbe, Jonathan Matthew Syrbe, in Long Island, New York, in the family that he came from, the culture or the education or the lack thereof, and this physical mess that he is? He can't talk right. I mean, I would never walk into a full room. I mean, forget about doing oral reports. I mean, my nickname was Yan Yurt Yan. Because I went under the step name sometimes, because when you're young, you kind of like want to fit in more, and so I would use my mother's new name that from my stepfather when she married after the divorce, And so it was John Birnbaum, but people would say Jan Yurtjan. And so I would walk in a room, and I would kind of like pinpoint somewhere on the floor, and I would kind of like scurry myself away there. And it's just astonishing. And then you look at Jesus, of course, the King of the universe, coming out of Nazareth, the most unlikely place, right? The King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And then looking at Ephesians chapter 2, you may be familiar with or not, but there's a famous song now, I think it's Jeremy Camp, the Dead Man Walking. It talks about that, and that was me. I was dead man walking. And while you were dead in your transgressions, while here I was walking, but inside just completely dead with no hope for anything. And yet God coming to me, this filthy, stinky mess. Because now I began to make my own bad choices. And, growing up and saying, well, you're an accident. Well, okay, great. So I started living like an accident. And so then we look, forwarding on, when I went to School of Biblical Studies, or SBS, or School of Biblical Suffering, that's where you study through every book of the Bible in 9 months. It's 3 years in one. And where we studied every one, and then every book you had to read a minimum of 5 times. And then the smaller books you read, like Philippians and whatnot, you read up to 15 to 20 times. And it was the extraordinary transformation, what I can say, in where they would study through the inductive method. And I came to realize that it's just not, the Bible's not just a bunch of random verses thrown together. And I mean, before I'd be like, what? I mean, I got to read the whole book of Matthew in one day? Well, I realized you could read it in 2 hours. And so oftentimes in our Christianity, and mine at the time, I would think, oh yeah, a blessed day, a verse a day to bless my day. And I wouldn't realize the context. And I mean, you imagine a letter. Somebody sends you a letter. Well, how do you read it? Well, depending of, somebody on your heart there, you kind of go, oh, well, I'll read the end and see what they see. Oh, I love you. Oh, my. Yeah. Maybe in 2 weeks, I'll read the middle. Maybe next month, next year, when I get to it, I'll read the front of the letter. But that's how we treat the Bible. So our mindset needs to change, in which I'm thankful that God had done that in me and recognized that, wow, I mean, it takes 20, 25 minutes to read the book of Ephesians, my favorite book of the Bible. And so just how much he had transformed me in doing that school. Well, we can go to the next. Oh, here we go. So, and then this was the thing, is like when Jesus woke me from the dead, when he called me out and raised me at 19, I said to myself, well, with what you've done to me, who you are, who you were, who you are, and who you will be, and the revelation of the cross, how can I just sit here and do nothing? And so my gratitude back to him was saying, well, Lord, I will love you and serve you however, wherever, whenever. And obviously in my earlier year, first couple of years, I was still quite insecure. But this is one of the verses that have really stuck to me, and over the years, it's just fantastic of, well, and he died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but live for him who died for them and was raised again. 2 Corinthians 2, 5 and 15. And then Jesus said, be a Christian, be a believer. It's interesting, my friend Doug Burleigh, the son of Doug Coe, I'll mention, co-founder of the National Prayer Breakfast. He said, Christians quote verses, believers tell stories, and followers wear scars. And 31 times Jesus said, follow me, and follow me, and follow me. And yet, oftentimes, we want to hold on to our life. Well, two of the extraordinary things that happened in my life were when I had this muscle car. It was actually the one previous to this, but it was my idol. It was something I wouldn't let anybody touch. drive, sit on. I was a real fool, a real idiot. And one day God said, "Oh yeah? You like idols?" And the irony is, I'm here as a result of it. Because what happened was one day it broke down, and then it was in February. A lot of amazing things that God has done in my life in the month of February. So here it was in February. It broke down. I repaired a couple things in it, got it started up right away. Boom, 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 boom. I was like, wow. And so I get a little bit obsessive sometimes, so quick moving, and I had a sign there, "Please don't tow my car," etc. So I had my foot on the gas pedal, and of course with my gigando orangutan reach, my 6'8" wingspan, I went and I pulled the sign off, but my foot slipped off the gas pedal, and so then it stalled. And so I tried to get in again, and boom! And then all of a sudden I heard a loud bang, and before I knew it, 6-foot flames were coming up both sides of the car. And so I opened the door, I ran through the flames, and then like a fool, like a dog returning to its vomit in the Bible, like in Proverbs, I ran to the front, and I'm sitting here, and I'm trying to shovel the snow onto this car. I was so desperate. Then I started seeing white flames, and I got scared, and then I ran. And then as I ran, a minute later, it blew. And so I called the fire department, and they come, and they're like, "Hey, yeah." I'm like, "You don't understand, my car's on fire." "Okay, Charlie, go get the truck." And, No, my car's on fire. Okay. So then they finally came, and then they had to foam it, and it blew out a couple times. And then here's another time, and then I was humbled. So now here I am, I'm on a 12-speed bicycle for 6 months. Then I got a couple of jalopies, and then I got this other convertible. But God had rearranged my heart. And then here was a head-on collision that I survived. But now He had done a great work in my heart and freed me from this, gave me a loose grip on the things of life. And so, but what happened was I couldn't go to Farmingdale, this state university anymore for ornamental horticulture. I'm a professional tree climber and all that, but I was going to college for that and other things, and then I couldn't get there anymore. And so I lived in my car for 3 weeks. I got in a hernia and lost my job, and so I didn't have any insurance, and there I was living in my car. And so soon after that, a miraculous situation opened for me to now stay in a place for a year without paying anything. And so during that time, that was when I ended up at Christ for the Nations Biblical Institute. Well, and then during that time, there was this personal discipleship class by who became one of my pastors later as he founded a church when that sister school in Long Island closed down. But so here's one of the things he had warned people before and had them prepare. And so we were going to have, the following day, we were going to have a funeral, like a legit funeral. So we came to class that day, and there was this big coffin. And while we were there, people brought all sorts of things. They brought their skis, they brought their old pictures of boyfriends, girlfriends, and so they were laying these things into this coffin, all the things that held onto them. And one of the things that I put was actually a gold bracelet, and to dying to materialism of this world and letting go. And so there we were. We nailed the coffin, and then about 40, 50 of us, we all walked through the property of the school, up the hill to a pre-dug hole, just like a funeral, and then we buried it. Weeping and sobbing, the people, and the freedom and release of people, and letting go of the things in the world that were holding them back. And so during that time when I was at Christ for the Nations, it was very shortly there, that was 1990, there was a founder of People for Missions who came and spoke on Missions Emphasis Week. And so he was showing all these things, and I was crying, and I was so gripped in my heart. And so he offered a trip to Mexico, March 2nd, 1990, about 29 years ago. This March will be 30 years ago. And so I ran, and I signed up. And they weren't going to let me go because they didn't know, because I lost my job. They didn't know how I was going to pay for tuition, let alone go on a trip. And then the Lord provided miraculously through that. And so then I went. And out of that is now one of my, he's my best friend, Eric. And then he became the son-in-law of the pastor who who was one of my professors, Dennis Bambino, and became a spiritual father to me. But backtracking, when I was 19, when I came to church, it was a Methodist church. And my pastor, he was kind of like, well, in the Northeast especially, a lot of liberalism going through the Methodist conference. And so depending on who you talk to, he was either the black sheep or the white sheep. I mean, for us, we were considering him the white sheep. And so it was kind of more middle of the road, not like ultra-charismatic and not like low-line, liberal evangelicalism. So that was where I gave my life to Jesus when I was 19, and how him and Leslie, so Randy and Leslie, they took me in and they believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself, and how they gave me opportunities and they entrusted me and they gave me a key to their house. And little did I know what would happen. So now I went to Mexico and I died in Mexico. The old Jon Syrbe really died as I was now walking into this life of greater life than what I had through greater poverty than I had. I thought I was poor. I mean, we were on food stamps when I was growing up, and my mom would make me knock on the Catholic church doors and get checks, and we were always going to one supermarket and writing a check, cashing it, and then putting it in a bank so it didn't bounce, and then we'd have to steal these proof of purchases off of boxes to try and get money, just dollars and dollars from the, companies, and so then that was beginning of the journey of God calling me out. And when I was, after the surgeries, and then right before I was living in my car 3 weeks, I was staying actually at this couple's house who was the youth advisors before I became the youth director. And I woke up one night, and it was a youth of the mission. That's what many years I'm part of, but World Vision. And they were having a telethon, and they were showing about the children in the world, and I cried and I wept, and I felt like the Lord wanted me to sponsor a child, and I'm like, you got to be joking. I have nothing. And he said, yeah. And so by faith, I went and I sponsored a child, Maria Naberta Yoqueñon from Guatemala. And with the little seed of faith, I said, well, Lord, you imagine how small that is. Well, you divide it in 4 pieces and take one. That was kind of like my faith at the time, so small, almost microscopic. And I said, well, if I can go to her country one day, Lord, how amazing that would be. So fast forwarding just a little bit, within 6 months, I was out of the country. Within a year and a half, I was in her country, and never looked back since then. And the Lord has taken me, you can continue. So here is March 1990, a young little whippersnapper. And so now the Lord has taken me to more than 50 countries of the world in which I've lived in and served in. And you can continue. Then, of course, after 37 years in 30 countries, I met my princess from deep recesses of India. And then, of course, our super munchkins. Yeah, chasing elephants. And a little Adonia was in mommy's belly at the time. She's in the way back there. And sorry, if you can go back a couple of slides. Serve, where it says serve as the king as a sacrifice. So in my life, I was really convicted because I think, people would kind of pat me and they say, you're sacrificing so much, and then I would feel, well, yeah, I've given up a lot, but it's worth it, and it's amazing I do it again, even though there have been challenges. And then I was really convicted one day, and it's like, imagine the kings of the world, where people would be so honored to serve the king. Like I'm serving the King of England or whoever, maybe somebody better than that. But anyway, you get the point. But then when we serve in Christianity as a follower of Jesus, we go like, I got to serve. What a sacrifice it is. But actually, that should be the greatest honor and privilege, isn't it? Isn't that awesome? And so, are we committed to our own life and self, or are we committed to Him? Now, in Romans 12 here, the next one. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Now here is interesting, in another version, is his living sacrifices, right? So my friend, the founder of that organization, he said, well, it's great that we're called to be his living sacrifices, but the problem is we're always trying to get off the altar. So embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture, does that sound familiar? That you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God, what is eternal. You'll be changed from the inside out, readily recognize what he wants from you, and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its levels of immaturity. God brings the best out of you, amen, and develops a well-formed maturity in you. And then my next one, my dear friend Scott Caesar, founder of Men's Discipleship Network. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Get brainwashed today through the power of God's word. And then I was ordained in 2001. Never thought that would ever happen. And that was the same year that I also founded Bridgestones International. And it was awesome because these two pastors of an independent charismatic church and a Methodist church co-ordained me together. It was so incredible, the journey. They co-officiated, they officiated our wedding and dedications and whatnot. Such a great testimony. And then 2005, I published Where There Is No Leader, Tag You're It, and being with Michael W. Smith and Max Lucado and others, just an extraordinary thing to happen. And then the next one, during that same time of his film, Second Chance, that I was able to go to that premiere, was also, I don't know if you recognize any of these people, Steve Saint next to me is the son of Nate Saint, who was with Jim Elliot when the 5 missionaries were killed in Ecuador. And Mick Yanni, the one who killed his father, is right there in the middle. And they were premiering, and it was an amazing honor to be able to sit next to them during their premiere of The End of the Spear. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it, The End of the Spear. And so that was him. Imagine them walking around in Walmart. And obviously he doesn't look like he's from this place. And then the woman at the cash register goes, oh, well, who are you? Oh, well, I'm the one who killed his father. How extraordinarily the Lord is using them in the area of forgiveness. And now when I was at our wedding, we had about 350 people from our wedding. Our first 2 weddings were in India, same woman, and the same woman for the third one. And so we were there, and I wept as I was there with my best friend Eric, hiding in some room there, and I just saw cars after cars coming and just wept and just going, God, I just feel so unworthy. I mean, just an amazing thing of what you could do through anyone's life who said yes. And so anyway, I was in the front, and then my bride, imagine this, another miracle, is that my father and mother were walking down the aisle on the left and right side of her. That they were in the same room together was a miracle. So anyway, as they came forward, I felt inclined to take the microphone, and I addressed them, and I said, Mom and Dad, now everybody in the audience, they all knew my testimony, where I'd come from, what had happened to me. And I said, I just want to let you know that I love you, and there were things in our life that were, and then there weren't. But I respect you and I honor you, and I thank you for giving up your freedom to bring me into this world, not knowing what I would become. And in spite of that, and then now because of that, hundreds of thousands of people around the world have been touched and transformed and have gotten to encounter their Creator, their Savior. So thank you. And obviously, it's only through the power of God and the Holy Spirit to be able to have a heart, to be able to, and then capacity to forgive. And so, the extraordinary testimony of these guys, there's a couple of his natural children, and then the other one on the far right was the actor who played McYani when he was younger. And then, of course, the little boy was playing Steve when he was a boy during the movie. So this restoring value to life concept came as a result of this, and how many doors have opened through this, and from military in Sierra Leone to schools in China and other places where they would give you one opportunity to say the word God. Sometimes they wouldn't at all. But now how God has just opened door after door in universities and wherever I've gone with this, and that was why we named our second child Sierra Destiny, after the wonderful Sierra Leonean people of West Africa, where I have a real close place in my heart, and where I was flown in by the UN and invited by World Relief to share with a couple of days with some intensive working through conflict resolution, etc., with 400 ex-rebels and ex-combatants. I don't know if you're familiar with Tears of the Sun with Bruce Willis, or there's another one, I can't think of it off the top of my head, Diamond, Blood Diamond with DiCaprio. So that is a lot of what I've experienced in the aftermath with a lot of the rebel takeover of Sierra Leone. And then I was invited to speak to all different military installations throughout Sierra Leone. Just extraordinary how God has used that and birthing that while living in the jungle in Madagascar, leading a team of 15. And so this has been like the paramount verse in my life verse, in doing to others what you would dream, hope for, aspire for them to do for you, in Matthew 7:12. How so many people around the world have a need, right here and right out there, have a need to encounter Jesus. And you think of how comfortable we've become in our own life, in our own world, and yet trying to somehow picture ourselves in that world, that life of somebody out there who's saying, would somebody just come and reach me out of my pit? Would somebody just come and bring healing to me and hope? And then my dear friend Ann Beavis, she had said, you can serve God and not love him, but you cannot love God and not serve him. Well, we can get away with it here on earth, but then when we stand before God. So then here was the journey now in the 90s, where I served aboard the Anastasis, the Mercy ship, for 7 years. And so going through a lot of West Africa and Europe, Scandinavia, sailing across the Atlantic, sharing with the East Coast and Vision and whatnot, and to get more volunteers, and the extraordinary journey had been. And here's one of the girls that I saved. Her name is Fifi, who was a Sierra Leonean refugee. And next, here are some surgeries, life-transforming, life-saving surgeries. And one of the girls, Ado, I was able to help save. This was actually my surgeries here. Imagine some of these people, they hadn't been touched in years. One woman hadn't been touched by another human being for 10 years until one of my colleagues had put their arm around her before she had the surgeries. She had a pierced earring infection and then developed into these nasty, huge keloid tumors. And how she broke in the power of God's love just by an embrace. See, sometimes that's all what it takes, isn't it? And then, of course, the transformation of her surgeries. And so the privilege, if you go back to there, my surgeries, Dr. Gary Parker, imagine this, coming from what I've explained so far in that journey, from who I was, and then going all the way, how God planned, designed, that I would go on the other side of the planet, and he would give me the greatest privilege of having the surgery, my final surgeries, by the greatest maxillofacial surgeon in the world, Gary Parker. And he's one of the most humble, top two humblest people that I know on this planet. And he's the one who arranged it all. And it was so incredible. And that happened in 1994 in February. Then, prior to knowing about Mercy Ships in 1991, this family, Robin and Joe Lazatera, they felt led one night to pray for me. And I've been supernaturally healed a couple times by them in the past. But this time, the father started to cry, and he said, I feel like the Lord's going to heal your voice and your mouth. And little did I know, 2 years later, I'd find out about Mercy Ships. They're doing a YWAM training, and then I'd end up on the ship, and then months later, how God orchestrated it. And the morning of my surgery, I was weeping and weeping, and I'm like, Lord, what are you trying to show me? Well, one is you'll experience the most physical pain you've ever felt in your life. That was true. I couldn't sleep for a week. I had to relearn how to breathe and swallow, and I lost 20 pounds. I was thinner than I am, plus I had to lose 20 pounds. So I had it drip into me, and so anyway, but the most profound thing, my grace will carry you through it, but the profound thing was, John, I want you to consider it as a privilege to identify with my people that are suffering in Africa. I thought, oh God, yes, whatever you want to do. So here is me teaching in the military, and then here's a boy, Sabaka, who was born like me, and his name meant hair lip. Imagine every time you hear your name, you're identified with your defect. And so one morning, there was another girl, Amida, 12-year-old girl with severe crossed eyes. And one morning, we're living 20 kilometers in the jungle. I wake up my translator. I'm like, Victor. My heart's like racing. I just feel the inclination to do it. I said, hey, Victor, you want to go for a run? And he's like, yeah, sure, Johnny, sure. All right. So him and we ran 20 kilometers out of the jungle through 21 footbridges. Too long to explain. Then we had to walk through a river. Well, for him, it was like this. For me, it was like this. And then we had to drive 2 hours to Tomatov just to see if they could have a surgery. And then we had to do the same 2-hour drive through the river and then run another 20 kilometers in the same day. So I ran 40 kilometers all through this experience to see if they would have surgery. And we were able to have surgery for him, and his parents had prayed to change his name, and I had the honor that they chose to change his name to Jonathan. And I was able to hear it the first time, the last time that I saw him. And then Amita was able to have surgery, but not there. She had to have it in the capital, and so her father went. And I found two weeks later, after I left the country, and Victor emailed me, and he said, John, I just want to tell you, because I met the father there. He came. He had left the family. He was a Muslim. And then he had put his hand on my lap, and he said, thank you for showing me how I should have been treating my daughter. So anyway, 2 weeks later, after leaving the country, Victor tells me that he came to know Jesus. It's so awesome. And then here's a former militant Muslim from Kashmir who used to make bombs and kill people. And I met him through me doing a seminar in northern India. He had fled the country, and then he met this woman in Kathmandu, and I'm not sure the picture's coming, but so then what happened was he went to the seminar and found out I was there, and he was so touched by it, and he said, I want to wash my wife's feet at our wedding. Now imagine, a former Muslim from the Indian culture to wash his wife's feet. And it was extraordinary, and I was able to be there. They arranged it for when I was going to be teaching in Kathmandu, and they weren't all talking about, oh, how wonderful you look, how nice. They were all talking about the astonishing thing that he had done. Now, of course, I wasn't married at the time, but, of course, I had to certainly follow that example. And many people go, oh, is that an American custom? And I'll say, no, actually, I'm not that good. The creator of the universe, the king of all, he came down to his dirty, broken humanity and washed their feet. So how dare I consider myself beyond doing such a thing? And so, of course, not just a one-day act, but a lifestyle. And then, of course, the wonderful journey of being attacked by baboons in South Africa. As my friend Brian terrified there, I was on the seat next to me, and my friend's camera went off when the baboon came in, and all the screaming and chaos. And How fantastic. So you can have these great experiences if you want to go to Africa. So in 2001, I started BSI, Bridgestones International, was restoring value to life and leadership. And then here's kind of like been my poster child, Pavi, who I saved. She had an accident, head injury in front of my house. Her father was drunk. They were on the same bicycle. And then took her to get fixed and saved. So then she came back. I brought her back to the slums. And that's what began me working in various slums in India. And she's been the #1 student, first generation literate, first generation knowing Jesus. She's been the topper in all her classes. And then, of course, then with Sina coming in the picture and us getting married and then her being a wonderful part of that as well in her journey. And then going all the way to graduating engineering college. And now she works for Goldman Sachs. And it's too much to tell you, but the painful, extraordinary journey that she went through, and this is a revelation that she had, where it's been a revelation for me and transformative, is some of the greatest miracles in life come through suffering, don't they? And of course, Jesus, the pinnacle example of that, of the most extraordinary suffering, and how much she considers that the greatest miracle in her life, that she had that accident and all the miracles what God had taken her to and through. And she was 9 years old at the time, and here she was my translator for going to many of these families, and she talked about being immersed in discipleship and learning in an accelerated rate. And now she's carrying 40 or 50 kids herself. It's so awesome. And we just had the great privilege of being there in July, and I was able to officiate her wedding. And how awesome the Lord is. And then here's some more people with medical camps, which Sina has head in the different places that we've been. And so here it is, taking people, literally, their lives being spared and saved and healed. And then we co-pioneered King's Kids School and Children's Home for 1,000 children, where there's 500 day students, and then the other will reside there. That is our vision. We have a bit over 100 children there right now, and rescuing children who, of course, are in the pit or they're orphaned. They need to be rescued from something, and to give an extraordinary hope, and especially for the girl child, how awesome it is. And I'm so thrilled, and I was so thrilled at Jon's message on women in ministry the other day, and how awesome as a man to be able to be a voice for the voiceless, especially in many cultures in the world, and to have the passion and the vision to speak the truth of God's original and continual intent for women. And then, of course, there are many waiting still to be rescued. And now here is the other extraordinary thing that I never expected, is how God has used the tool of a camera. And of course, for many years, I was kind of in denial. People say, "You're a photographer?" No. I just like take pictures, inspire people, and so on. But when I moved back to the States, when we got married 14 years ago, 5,402 days ago, I like to count the days, not just years. That every day should be special, right? And all the days of Adam were, I didn't say all the years. So anyway, just being able to have the extraordinary opportunity of using, so I went professional in 2005 when we moved back to the States, and how the Lord has used that, like for example, in bringing CBN photos to show the extensive relief needed for the flooding. And here now, in the last 7 years plus, being involved with the National Prayer Breakfast, with presidents my involvement has been now with Obama and Trump. And Doug Coe, who was the co-founder, a dear friend, he had passed away. He was known as the Stealth Billy Graham. And there's no leader, dictator, king that he has not met with, and how the many miracles you'll never hear. This is him. He had, there's Adonia on the left there, and he had written a welcome letter for Adonia coming into the world, and gave a Jesus Teachings book to her, and we kind of framed it and sent it back to him. Just an extraordinary man, and his wife Janice. But interesting enough, as he died the same day, or Billy Graham died the same day as him, and how many miracles, wars averted because of the Cedars activity, and him, Cedars as in overlooking in Arlington, And you would be so encouraged and inspired to recognize the miracles and miracles happening in Washington that we never hear about, and the privilege to be a part of that. And so being a part of the National Prayer Breakfast, and for example, a friend of mine, Jim, who introduced me to Jim Rosebush, who had been Reagan's executive assistant and the chief of staff for Nancy, where he wrote this book, True Reagan, and be a great read. But I was able to bring him back into the Washington White House arena, and there's Uncle Ben, yay, Uncle Ben. So just a great man, showing what really made Reagan great was his life with Jesus and the example that he set. And then one of my all-time heroes, Rick Warren, and of course his book, if you haven't read it, the best first line you'll ever read in any book, it's not about you. And so it was great to meet with him and chat with him, and some of these great thoughts about you must care about what God cares most about, and seeking first the kingdom. Like oftentimes what we do, in life we're kind of like, yeah, oh, I want to do this, oh, I'm going to go to this school, oh, I want to marry this girl. Oh, Lord, where are you? Where are you? Oh. Instead of going, well, Lord, what do you want? Where do you want me to go? Is this right for me? And then I love what he talks about being a successful day, and he made it so simple that it's when I kind of been my part of my mantra, if you will, is when you're waking up, when you're going to bed, a successful day is, well, Lord, did I come to know you a little bit more? Have I come to love you a little bit more? Have I been a bit loving more to somebody else? And how awesome that is. And what faith goal do you have in your life? And then here is just a quick through a few of the people that, again, what God has done and where he could take. I can never dream of any of these things, but I was the personal life manager for the daughter of the Godfather, Al Pacino and those guys. She happened to be our neighbor, but then their family wanted me to do a special photo thing for their family in the Oscars. Those things are heavy. Holy cow. They're like 40 pounds. Anyway, there's fellow Georgian, woohoo, Kendrick. So photographing him a couple times, and on Holyfield, Darryl Strawberry a few times, Mariano Rivera, Lauren Green from Fox News, Stephen Baldwin. And so through this and my journeys, all to be able to just share, it's all about him and what he can do with a surrendered life. And I've traveled more than 1 million miles. Don't know how many after 1 million, but in just about most phases of transportation, and more than 800 different beds, or lack thereof, or quasi-beds. And of course, the challenges that come along with it, being in war zones and having these funky things happening on my hands, and being sick and finishing my book, for example, where I thought I was going to die, and immobile for 3 or 4 days, totally isolated, and but yet so worth it because of him. I've been held at gunpoint 4 times. I've been under house arrest in Guinea at the border of Sierra Leone, threatened more times than I know. And then also, of course, the betrayal. Anybody ever been betrayed? I mean, just this past couple of years of being betrayed in half of our work in India and having to let go. But here's a great thought, is that we meet people. Well, when we meet them, they're one of 2 things. They're either a lesson or a blessing or a lesson. And just like Paul said in Acts 20:24, I consider my life worth nothing to me, if only I may finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given to me, the task of testifying to the fantastic gospel of God's grace. And in 2 Timothy, towards the end of his run, I have fought the fight, I finished the race, I've kept the faith. Now, there are many who may live and say, well, I've got tomorrow. I'll just put it off. I'll do that. I'll get to that. I'll go there. But I believe the devil's favorite word is tomorrow. If he can always convince us that tomorrow will come, then we'll not take that step. and how awesome to see in Acts 13:36. Now David, when he had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep. And I hope that each one of us can find that way in knowing that we fulfill God's purpose in our generation. So if our family, or Bremen, or Georgia, or the world were duplicated of me, what condition would it be? Who would they know Jesus to be by seeing my life? So we can live the easy life or the complicated life. We see here, here's a picture we found in Long Island. There's a house. It's beautifully decorated on this side. Oh, imagine the hours and days that it took them to do that. And then you look on the left side, they have these big lights like this, and they just say ditto with an arrow. So what life do we want? An easy believer or a follower? And of course, I would be remiss to say that we all need somebody. I have had extraordinary privilege of having many people in my life who have helped to shape me and to help me to become more like Jesus. I'll finish with this. So when I was in South Africa, you can probably tell I love a little bit of adventure. So imagine, here's a bridge, the Bukrans Bridge, not the Brooklyn Bridge, but Bukrans Bridge in South Africa. And I'm sorry, the fonts are a little bit off, but I'll tell you. So I went to do the world's highest bungee jump, which is in South Africa. And it's 648 feet or 216 meters. So now you go out there, you're in the center under the carriageway, and then they harness you up, and then there's two guys that kind of hop you to the edge, and then there's 4,000 beats a minute, boom, 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 trying to get you accelerated to, get motivated to do this foolish thing. So I had these two guys there, and then they do this countdown, 10, 9, 8, and meanwhile, in my mind, I'm going 10, 11, 12. And I'm like, you got that expression, if somebody told you to jump off a bridge, would you do it? Well, yeah, of course, I can say that. But so anyway, I'm standing there, and now in that moment, now it's interesting, they put the harnesses on where the bathroom is, not where you register. I'll let you figure that out. So anyway, so then you get the harness, you're on there, and then you go to do this jump. But it was amazing, this instructor said, fear is temporary and regret is permanent. Fear is temporary and regret is permanent. Because now you think about it, I have that choice, that moment, to say, well, it's too much for me, I can't handle it, my fear is overwhelming me, it's me, 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 me. I mean, it might be wise at that moment, maybe. I'm not saying jump off a bridge. But you take that and then apply it in our lives, and how often is it because of fear, like wonderful Scott Caesar is great where he penned it, is the root of fear is actually pride. And so here it is. There was that guy Joe who really needed some help, but in fear of what might happen, I didn't help him. Or, I had that word for you that God wanted me to speak, but in fear of what you might say, I didn't give you that word. There was someone who needed a desperate help, and I just couldn't put my arm around him. He smelled too bad. He looked too bad. Whatever that may be in our life. And so God's great challenge to us is to not allow fear. I mean, even like John said it brilliantly, it's not the absence of fear, faith, but it's even with the fear, you walk by faith and not by sight. So God bless you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And thank you for following Jesus.